Welcome back. Now, though the Ferguson officer, Darren Wilson, was completely cleared of any wrongdoing in the shooting death of Michael Brown, the Justice Department picked up where the rioters left off. In March, the department issued a scathing report on the city of Ferguson, concluding that a culture of systemic racial bias permeated the police department. Take a look.
A big blow to the Ferguson Police Department's already damaged reputation. On Tuesday, the U.S. Justice Department concluded its months-long investigation, saying officers routinely engaged in racially biased acts. The investigation began in August after the shooting of unarmed black teen Michael Brown by a white police officer in Ferguson, sparking nationwide protests. The killing brought to light what some residents said was systemic mistreatment of black residents by a mostly white police force.
Well, since the New Yorker published a lengthy piece on former Ferguson officer Darren Wilson, the journalist Jake Halpern did what he did best. He tried his damnedest to paint Wilson as a racist. One of the questions, do you think Michael Brown was a bad guy? Wilson's answer, I only knew him for those 45 seconds in which he was trying to kill me, so I don't know. But the racial questions continued. But here with his response, former police officer and active shooter expert Chris Grollnek. Chris, thanks for being with me tonight.
Hello, Tommy. How are you today?
I'm doing quite well. It's our 100th episode, so I want to look back a year ago to Ferguson. So we now know that the whole hands up, don't shoot thing was a farce, but anything else you'd like to note about that day?
I think it was a good start to a narrative that probably needs to occur throughout the community, although it started under improper basis. We know post-autopsy of Michael Brown, and then just as recently as this past weekend where the chief of Memphis Police said all lives matter. I think it's a good narrative to have, that we want to talk police and community, and that would be as simple as a set of policies going forward.
So let's look at what the Justice Department said, the clip that I played earlier. We know that they said that a culture of racial bias existed in that community. Do you think that that's so? Do you think that that report was fair?
I think the report is probably accurate based on the facts that it presented, because you can not skew, but you can make any report look any way you want. So as a police officer, if I work a predominantly Hispanic area and all my traffic stops are of Hispanic people, you can draw the conclusion that maybe I'm a racist and wanted to just stop Hispanic people, instead of looking at the broader demographics of the area, or the socioeconomic demographics of the area. So I've worked both African-American, white, Hispanic, or Asian beats, if you will, in my time. And over time, it all smooths out. But Ferguson in that area is predominantly African-American, therefore you're going to have a predominantly amount or a large amount of stops of African-Americans. The problem is they did come up with a good portion in that report that, yes, they were doing what they call unqualified stops just to be an income producer, if you will, as almost part of a tax base. But I think that has very little to do with the actual death of Michael Brown.
I want to go to the death of Michael Brown now, because we know that Darren Wilson is surfacing. We know he fears for his life. He lives now on the outskirts of town. His family has to be very careful where they tread. We know that many people have threatened his life. Do you think that he's receiving fair treatment in this case, even though he was cleared of all wrongdoing?
Tommy, I think I've said this before. Police work, police officers are the hardest job to get and the easiest job to lose. And you have to respect that from the day you put on the badge to the day you retire, like I did. I retired, I'm paralyzed on my left arm. Therefore, I can't work as a police officer anymore. And, Darren is now, if you will, paralyzed from being a police officer. So if it's fair or not, I'm not sure you can make a qualified assessment of that either as a psychologist or a professional police officer. However, what I would say is the circumstances of that day left a tragedy in place. Someone lost their life, an officer lost his job. He's on the run with his family. I do grieve for the family. My prayers are with them. I also feel, a little sympathy, if you will, for Darren Wilson and his family, because he's going to make some life changes and choices that he wasn't necessarily prepared for. That goes with what we see in Baltimore right now. Police are fearing because they don't want to become the next Darren Wilson. And we saw by the lineup from the arrest there, it doesn't have to be white police officers. It could be any police officers. I'm not going to say there's a war on police, but I am going to say what I believe is the police spring occurring, if you will.
And the problem with this is they focus on the race so often. They focus on the race of the officer and they focus on the race of the victim or the suspect. I think that's problematic. Instead, when we have these incidents that should never result in death, should never result in deadly force, if that is the case, that they shouldn't have, let's look at the training aspects of it. Let's look at what we can do to address it instead of immediately going for the race card and saying that, yes, because it was a black suspect and a white officer, that indeed it must be racially motivated. That's my frustration with it. And we're seeing it time and time again with every case that comes out. Samuel Dubois, then we've got, again, Sandra Bland. Everything has to be motivated by race. I don't think that that's giving good enough credit to the investigation itself. But I want to move on now to some of those cases. I want to get your take on them. Let's talk about Sandra Bland, if you will. We've seen the videos come forward. We've seen the jailhouse. We've seen her being dragged out now. We know it's been sensationalized by the media. What's your reaction?
I think the largest outcry from the community, if you will, is that she's arrested in the first place. And people want to deny that she actually committed suicide because she had a job or maybe 2 job offers waiting for her. I don't think you can quantify that either because nobody knows what it's like to be behind bars until you are behind bars, unfortunately, for the good or the bad. However, perhaps the way the trooper responded to the traffic stop itself, I don't really think by watching that dash cam video, you could tell if it was an African American or not behind the wheel. But once he encountered the driver of the vehicle, I don't think race played a part of it whatsoever. I think the probably trooper let, again, his emotions get the best of him. We saw that right here in Even McKinney. You and I have talked about that before. Police are only human. We're not trained robots. We can't make split-second decisions based on the anatomy of what's going to happen after that moment. And that's why the Supreme Court has so many laws in place of the moment in time. Now, what led to the stop? Who knows? Why the stop went south? Maybe the trooper had a bad day. Maybe he didn't take kindly to the person not complying to his orders. But it's a training of the public, too. I mean, the public need to understand. Respect the police and dispute it later. That's the best advice you can give anyone.
Again, I think it was more in this case, what it seemed like anyway, it was more of an issue with her attitude, not her race. So whether he acted appropriately or not, that remains to be seen. But again, we have a culture in this country right now where speaking out against police, being aggressive or combative towards police is now the new norm. It's now being glorified, celebrated. I think that's wrong. We need to respect authority. If you have an issue after the fact, take it up after the fact and get disciplinary action. Then don't try to confront an officer. Don't be combative. But I've been saying this for a while now. Before we wrap, though, I want to talk about something that's in the news right now, a little bit of a different case, and that's involving children. So a Kentucky sheriff's deputy now faces a federal lawsuit for handcuffing elementary school children who were acting out because of hyperactivity and other disabilities. We've seen the videos here. What's your take on that one?
Okay, so that's, we're coming from an internal affairs qualification background, if you will. I'm a certified internal affairs investigator. I would look at this as a training policy failure, more of a policy failure. It didn't seem to me that the sheriff's deputy had any training on how to deal with the exceptional incident that was taking place, and his best bet was his go-to, let's restrain the child, let's stop him from either A, hurting himself or others. But there seems to me that the teacher called the police officer in to handle the child, and if I read the policy correctly, they're not supposed to in the first place. So I think it was a kind of a setup to fail mentality. And it's not that I blame the police officer, I just blame that he wasn't trained appropriately to deal with children, because there's an entire section of penal code in the state of Texas and code of criminal procedure of how to treat juveniles. And there are hours of courses that can go on. And I just don't believe that sheriff's deputy got the fair share of those training hours and then was asked to go be a school resource officer. They can't be problem solvers for everything and then hold them accountable when they make one mistake. Even as egregious as this, which I do believe it was, I would have never handcuffed an 8-year-old at the biceps.
And again, everything seems to come back to training and how to handle these incidents that police officers might not be familiar with. What do you do with an 8-year-old that's acting out? How do you handle the situation? More training to me is always the answer. But I think also when we look at this, we're seeing so many cell phone videos now come out. We get the perspective of the person taking the cell phone video. And I think that discredits the investigation as a whole because you're only getting one perspective. So that brings me to my last question for you. Body cams, good or bad in these types of situations?
Awesome. I've been vindicated by my dash cam video recorder more times than I can tell you. There's a case that just happened recently, I believe it was in Kansas City. A video from a cell phone was showing 2 officers take somebody to the ground. They said, look, it's racist. It's, they're aggressively beating this person up. But you watch the dash cam and the body cam video, it exonerated the officers completely because they asked the person, please turn around, you're under arrest for however many warrants they had, more than one, and the person started resisting arrest and battering the officers, but we didn't see that from the other tape. I do think video cameras are great. I think cell phone videos are great. I just think we need policies and procedures in place that we can train our officers, even in 5-minute intervals of briefing. Hey, look, here's how to deal with the community, and then go back to the roots of community policing. Get out of your car, walk the beat, and know your neighborhood, know your people you're working with, and you can gain exceptional amount of trust and respect, and then you respect them. I had a assistant help save my life one day during the middle of a fight, so you never know what you're going to get.
I think it's important for that trust to be restored, and I don't think that the media is doing this any favors by widening the racial gap here and making it seem like it's always white officers against black victims. I think that's a problem because we need to get back to community policing, and if police officers are afraid of arresting black suspects or black victims, if you will, because they're depolicing to protect themselves, and if the suspects, if they're African American, whatever color they are automatically turned against white police officers because they believe everything is racially motivated, we don't have a solution at the end of the day. We've got both parties in a distrust there. So again, you're right. Training, training, training. Chris, thanks for being with me tonight. After the break.